Do 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 do. Hello, how are you doing? Why do I have my iPad out for notes? Welcome back from sunny Florida into the cold wasteland of wintertime here in Lexington. Let's take a look at a couple cameras. I could easily say I've shot the bejesus and hell and gone out of both of these cameras. I got a couple Nikon D500s. Actually, the camera that's filming my ugly face right now is also a Nikon D500. So here we have it. Nikon D850 and Nikon D500. Right? So which of these is the better camera? 20 megapixels versus 46 megapixels, essentially. Which one of these is the better camera? For what use? Well, what's the current price on the Nikon D500? Of course, they're averaging about $1,100 used right now in minty condition. And Nikon's been offering a bunch of deals lately where you get a vertical grip for free with the Nikon D500. But what's the advantages? Which one would you actually rather shoot with? Are we talking about sports, action, wildlife, photojournalism, club photography, i.e. low light grady photography where no flash photography is possible? Use a speed light and flash. In a club, they're going to throw you out on your ear. Most clubs, that is, unless of course you make an arrangement for your own specific flash photography for that club or for that event. So which one's the best? Let's just talk about, say, sports, action, and wildlife. Well, the Nikon D500, while it doesn't have a bottomless buffer, is a lot better than the Nikon D850 does. Also, too, less blackout time, higher frame rate, much deeper buffer than Nikon D850. Well, what if you throw, and it should be the case, but it's not, and Nikon did that purposefully. If you stuck the Nikon D850, which by the way, in crop mode, is also 20 megapixels. Now here's the trick question, which you should be able to get really easily. Which one of these cameras has more megapixels? Well, this one's 20 and this one's 46, so it must be the D850 has more megapixels. Well, when it comes to cropping, which you do 99% of the time for sports, action, and wildlife, 99% of the time, bit of an exaggeration, not really, the answer is that both are absolutely identical. Here's something else that no other YouTube photography channel talks about. The only person I've actually heard talk about this in brief passing, and I love his YouTube channel a lot, he's a wildlife photographer, that's Steve Perry. There might be another person that's talked about it. Autofocus spread. Well, it's only very slightly more than, say, a Nikon D750, for example. Slightly wider. The autofocus spread, and there's a little sensor in the bottom of the light box of each one of these cameras that's reflected through. There's a primary mirror. Of course, you know that on a DSLR. And you actually have a secondary mirror, which is angled like this behind the primary, which directs the light into the autofocus sensor bay, which calculates autofocus. Right? Right. Well, the autofocus spread on the Nikon D500 and D850, while there's a slight difference, are essentially the same. So, for example, in tracking, say you got a 500 millimeter, even a 300 millimeter 2.8, and you're tracking, I don't know, a car going around the corner, or you're tracking a bird flying in the sky, you have a lot better autofocus hit rate with the Nikon D500 because the autofocus spread covers, and here's one of several advantages. One thing that actually pisses me off about a lot of these damn YouTube photography channels is they talk about gear a lot, and I can certainly be accused of that myself, but they don't actually know what they're talking about. All they do is talk about how great full-frame sensor cameras are. And while full-frame sensor cameras for field of view, specifically also too tilt-shift lenses for architecture and landscape, full-frame does have some advantages. There are several advantages to crop sensor cameras. This is the reason why, over the past many countless years, National Geographic photographers, for example, were using cropped sensor cameras. Specifically, one of the major ones, the D200, with $15,000, $16,000 lenses like the Nikkor 800mm or the Nikkor 600mm f4. Why are these people who have basically cameras given to them in some circumstances and they're using lenses that are as expensive as your car, why the hell are they using crop sensor cameras? Autofocus, well, there's several reasons. Pixel pitch, autofocus spread. you actually have wider coverage, more of the sensor, much more in the case of a crop sensor camera, where the autofocus on a DSLR, we're not talking about mirrorless here, on a DSLR, the autofocus spread covers much further, top to bottom, left to right, specifically left to right, especially for tracking birds in flight and other moving creatures, and also things for sports and action, than you do on a full-frame sensor camera. Have you turned on a full-frame sensor camera and know what the autofocus spread is relative to the sensor? It's like this versus the sensor. And D500, D7200, D7100 autofocus spread is much wider, covers much more of the sensor. Autofocus spread. The buffer on the D500 is better. This is a much better camera for birding, both buffer depth, autofocus spread. The pixel pitch is the same. While the D850 does have a wee bit more dynamic range and slightly cleaner output because it is not only a newer sensor, but specifically it's a BSI sensor. So you actually have better dynamic range, you actually have better native gain because the actual architecture of the sensor is a backside illuminated sensor. This is where the wiring infrastructure of the sensor is brought from the top to the bottom, so it has better native gain. Remember, ISO has no connection to exposure in digital photography. It is applied post analog to digital converters. It is input amplification. ISO is not part of actual exposure. So we do have better native gain on Nikon D850, but the D500, and the D500 has been out for how long now? Quite a long time. I've owned 3 of these. One of them I repaired. I did like a 6-part video repairing it. A guy actually rolled it down a steep embankment, and it went into a creek. That's off topic, however. But less blackout time, better buffer, and better autofocus spread. If you want to actually educate yourself on autofocus spread, just do a Google search if you need some pictorial examples of autofocus spread, specifically relational to full frame versus crop sensor cameras. So and like I said, that's one thing that actually pisses me off about some of these really large YouTube photography channels, which are not really photography channels. What they are Trojan horse sites for delivering affiliate links for lining their pockets. But DX crop sensor cameras have several advantages over that of full frame. Doesn't matter if it's Nikon or Canon, or can't really say that about Sony, but certainly so Nikon and Canon. D500 is as incredible as it ever was. I know that Nikon D6 is about to be announced here in the next few months. I don't know when it's going to come out, later this year. I do know for a fact that the new Nikon D6, which of course is obviously a full-frame sensor camera, I heard it's a 24-megapixel BSI sensor camera, is going to have 2 CF Express cards, and the camera has no specifications for buffer. It is absolutely bottomless, no matter whether you shoot RAW or RAW plus fine. Doesn't matter what you shoot on the new Nikon D6. The buffer is bottomless. But of course it's going to be a $6,500 to $7,000, $7,500 camera, probably no more than $7,000. But it's going to have a bottomless buffer. The reason for that is it's going to instantly shuttle images from the main board onto those really fast CF Express cards. And of course that's the next evolutions of Nikon's Pro DSLR. But even with that being said, even though I don't know all the specifications on the new Nikon D6, this is still a better camera for general photojournalism, sports action, and wildlife. Nikon D500 is an exquisite camera. There's only one negative, actually, real negative to the Nikon D500, and that's not to do with the sensor, but actually how Nikon weighted the output, is that the D500 is about 3/4 of a stop, a hair more than 3/4 of a stop actually, more prone to clipping highlights than most other Nikon cameras. Recent ones like the D850, D750, D7200 for example. The D500 is prone to clipping highlights, so that's something you have to watch as far as your exposure comp and not blowing out your highlights. But this is a better camera for photojournalism and more sports and action. And of course, the D850 and the D500 have been out now for quite some time, but I still keep getting endless email questions and comments about, like, which camera should I buy? Now, obviously, if it's for architecture or landscape, the reason being is that wide-angle lenses, several other reasons. Obviously, for architecture, landscape, specifically too a perspective control lens, i.e. a tilt shift lens, which seemingly nobody uses these days, even though they're so incredibly important, specifically for architecture. There's nothing that beats a perspective control lens for absolute control, for product photography, architecture, and landscape photography. I even talked to a couple of really prominent landscape photography channels here on YouTube, and one guy told me, like, yeah, I don't even own a perspective control lens. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, you climb these mountains to reach these exotic locations, and you got a Nikon camera with you. Why the hell aren't you using a perspective control lens, for Christ's sakes? I wouldn't even think about, you know, risking my butt hiking, climbing up the side of sharp rocks with a Nikon D850, for example, and not having a perspective control. It is just really ridiculous. It makes doing panos so much more precise and perfect. Getting all your tree lines to be vertical and parallel with each other instead of, you know, you typically have a wide angle lens even if you're shooting straight ahead. If you do any tilt up or tilt down, the tree tops are converging, you know. They look so much cleaner when they're actually parallel. That's one of the countless things that perspective control lens is so important for not only for architecture, where you want your lines not to converge, because architecture generally you don't want the architecture to look like it's collapsing in on itself at some finite point past the top or bottom of the frame. But look up autofocus spread. It's actually very important, and this is one of the serious advantages of crop sensor, i.e. DX sensor cameras. D500 is still absolutely epic tits. Still hasn't been surpassed by anything. Has not. The buffer on the D500 is incredible. I, of course, was right when I was the first person on YouTube to review this damn camera, and I was, and everybody made fun of me and told me I was full of shit, saying that everybody should go buy this camera, and of course, I was proven 100% correct. I've never been wrong on an actual hands-on review on a Nikon camera. People can say that I was, like the Nikon Z6 and Z7, but those cameras are horrible. I'd be the first person to scream it from the top of a tall building that people to go buy those cameras if they were any damn good or worth buying, and they're not. And it's not because of, as I've already said, build quality or image output. It's because they're crappy first-generation products with inferior autofocus, poor user interface design, no compatibility for D-series lenses, no secondary backup card slot, no vertical grip capability, on and on and on. Screw those cameras. Nikon knows they screwed up. They do now, anyway. But there we go. It's the summation in brief. I think this was brief. Someone's going to still complain. You could have made this video 3 minutes long so you kept flapping your damn lips. I hate you. Well, wonderful. But at least I'm not selling anything, you know? I actually have shot the piss and hell and gone out of both these cameras, and I can actually comment on them very intelligently as far as one versus the other. And I know I've already said this once already in this video, I really hate all these don't literally hate them. I hate these damn YouTube channels. Like, everything's full frame's better, full frame's better. Shut the hell up with that BS. Shut it up. Oh, full frame's better. Medium format's a lot better. But no, DX and FX are pretty damn close. However, there's nobody with a brain. If they have both cameras in hand, it's like, I'm going to do some architecture and landscape. But I got both of these cameras in my hand. Nobody with a half a brain that knows up from down or their asshole from their elbow is going to pick a crop sensor camera over that of a full frame for landscape or architecture. Nobody. And if you don't know the reasons to that, I have like 100 videos discussing that, as well as countless other people saying. So, thank you so much for watching. Welcome me back to this cold winter wasteland. I'd rather be back in Florida. Almost kind of. Florida is where old people go to die. It's just, everybody's just walking around with like either an enlarged prostate, skin cancer, or cataracts. There's really good parts of living in Florida, and there's crappy parts of living in Florida. The rainy season's a really crappy part. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you like these videos. Tell me how much you hate me. Give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. I don't do anything for money, and I've never done clickbait, even though I've been accused of that countless times. I don't do clickbait. So if you like these videos, you could always tell me how much you love it or hate it, or click the link below. And since I don't sell anything and I have no affiliate links, any small donation is greatly welcome, because I want you to save money and be happy. And I do mean that honestly. So thank you so much for watching. Peace out, Girl Scout. As they say in Russia, увидимся, до свидания, hasta luego, see you soon, aloha, all that crap. Bye. Peace out. There we go. Do I have this shirt on inside out? Do I have it? No, I don't. I thought I had this shirt on inside out. That would have been funny. People would have made fun of me. Even more so than they normally do. Okay.